Hello, anatomy students. This is our last distance learning unit on the digestive system. Before we get into the PowerPoint and kind of talk through the notes a little bit, I just want to let you know that this is definitely going to be kind of an abbreviated version. The digestive system is pretty complex and pretty long, but I'm going to try and box it up for you as quickly as we can. I also encourage you to watch the dissection video. If you really liked the dissection videos we saw in class before, or at least thought they were interesting, the one of the digestive system does not disappoint. So I put a link to it on there. It's actually the full video on YouTube. So check that out and say hi to Gunter and take a look. So we're going to go digestive system basically from mouth to stomach, and then we'll pause, and then we'll go intestines through waste disposal all the way through the end. So video number one will be just kind of this first segment. And the first thing we'll talk about is just taking food into your body. We got a couple of specific terms we use for this. Ingestion, that just means putting food into your mouth. Propulsion is the movement of food all the way through, and it moves differently in certain phases. Peristalsis we'll talk about a little more specifically. The reason I have it up here right now is because when we're moving food through a tubular organ like an esophagus or like the small intestine, it has to be squeezed through with these layers of muscle, very similar to the way you squeeze toothpaste out of a tube of toothpaste. And then absorption, a key term because this is where we're getting our nutrients. It's kind of very strange to think about it. You kind of have to wrap your head around this, and I wish I was in class to talk to you about this a little bit more, but think about the inside of your intestinal lining or the inside of your stomach is really the outside of your body. Very strange to think about it. I know we refer to that as our inside, right? Think about the inside of your mouth. The inside of your mouth is technically on the outside of your body. Now, obviously, we absorb materials into our mouth and, we secrete material out of it, saliva, but we think about putting food in our body. That's the word we say. But basically, we just have this big tube running through our body from our mouth to our anus, and food temporarily stays in there. Some of it we absorb into our body, and some of it we release as waste, which is defecation. That happens at the end with our solid waste. Couple kinds of digestion that are going to take place. First is mechanical digestion. And mechanical means that we're going to actually smash, grind, or break food up. And we use different types of organs to do this. Obviously, our teeth are designed to do this. And when you chew on food, it's called oral mastication. And then this food that's been orally masticated is taken into our mouth, moves through our esophagus, and gets into our stomach. Now, our stomach doesn't have teeth, but it's got three layers of muscle that move in three dimensions to kind of smash it up and grind it up in our stomach, and that's called maceration. And then this masticated, macerated food moves into our small intestine, where it sloshes back and forth for a little while so we can absorb the food, and that's called segmentation. Now, throughout this whole process, we also have chemicals and enzymes that help us take big macromolecules and break them down into small materials that we can digest and absorb into our bloodstream. And that's chemical digestion. So both these types of digestion work together to get our food down to the smallest particle. So the organs, okay, the whole run through here. What happens is we've got some organs that come in direct contact with the food we take in. And that's the mouth, the pharynx, which is kind of the back of our mouth, nose, and throat, the esophagus, the stomach, the small and large intestine. And then we have accessory organs. These are organs that may or may not come into direct contact, but they help this process through either mechanical or chemical digestion. So your mouth, your tongue, your teeth all come in direct contact with food to make mechanical digestion. Then we've got glands like your salivary glands that secrete saliva and digestive enzymes. And then our small intestine, our liver, our gallbladder, and our pancreas all secrete some type of digestive enzyme or chemical like acid to help break down our food through this process. So this whole picture here would have been something you'd see on the exam, kind of a little breakdown here. But as you look at this, you kind of get a feel for these accessory organs that don't come into direct contact with food, like the liver or the pancreas or the salivary glands, but they secrete these materials that help us digest our food. This is a great one-stop shop for all of the different areas here for what's happening with chemical digestion. In our mouth, The very first place chemical digestion happens is through salivary amylase. And I don't know if you remember talking about this in biology a little bit, but amylase takes carbohydrates and breaks them down into simple sugars. So carbs, carbohydrates. And that's the very first stop. And then we'll get to these other ones as we go along, but we'll take a sneak peek here ahead. The stomach secretes a couple of things: hydrochloric acid and pepsin, which is an enzyme. And pepsin breaks down proteins. That's what that pro is short for there. So what happens in the small intestine now is the small intestine secretes this stuff called gastric juice or intestinal juice. It's actually known as both. And it's alkaline instead of acidic, and it breaks down all three of these. The pancreas also secretes this. It squirts this little material into the small intestine. It's alkaline, and it secretes all three of these, but it's really good, really good at secreting or at breaking down proteins. The pancreas is actually kind of a semi-dangerous organ because it's powerful enough to digest ourselves. And then our liver secretes this material called bile. It's stored in the gallbladder, and it's really good for breaking down lipids. I don't know why we put that short there, just lipids. And then the esophagus and intestine, the large intestine, don't really secrete anything. They're coated in mucus, or what we would think of in our mouth as saliva, but it's a little thicker than that. But they're not doing any direct absorption of nutrients. That's why we don't see a lot of action there. So let's get back to this process here, and let's talk about what's going on in the mouth. So we've just ingested some food, and we're chewing it up, this oral mastication. We're using our tongue and our teeth to break this up into smaller parts, make digestion more effective once it gets to our stomach. The more we digest our food in our mouth mechanically, the easier it is for that food to be broken down in later stages in our digestive system. This massive food that we've chewed up into this kind of chewy ball of saliva and material and whatnot is now called what we call a bolus of food. And a bolus of food is what we actually are swallowing. Once again, we talked about our first step in chemical digestion also happens here with a material called salivary amylase. And amylase is an enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. You want to try something interesting, a little gross, but you'll get it. Take a saltine cracker, put it in your mouth, and don't chew it. And wait. And when I say wait, I mean let it get soft and gooey. It's going to be kind of gross. Wait a couple minutes. Somewhere between that, 90 to 120-second mark, you're going to suddenly notice this kind of sweet flavor in your mouth. And what's happening is the amylase is taking the carbohydrates, the complex carbohydrates in the cracker, and breaking them down to simple sugars. If you put a little spoonful of sugar on your tongue, you'd instantly taste this sweetness on your tongue, but you don't instantly taste that sweetness from a saltine cracker. But as that breaks down, as the carbohydrate breaks down into a simple sugar, that sweet flavor will come onto your tongue. So go check that out. You can take a look at that. The esophagus is just a move food. There's no actual digestion taking place here. Just a way of moving the food from our mouth down into our stomach. But we have our first unique type of movement, which is called peristalsis. So when food is moving through a tubular organ, we have to squeeze it along, right? It doesn't just fall like downstairs or something. No, it's going to actually be moved along. So peristalsis moves this down into what we call the esophageal hiatus, the opening for the conjunction between the esophagus and the stomach. Our lining of the esophagus, you can see there's a lot of this is a microscopic cross section. So we can see here is the lining that's covered by saliva, and then all this is muscle, this muscularis, and this muscle is there to squeeze that material down through the stomach. Once we get to the stomach, okay, now we can start our next phase of digestion. They say it's kind of a J-shaped, and it was more like a J on its side. The very upper part of the stomach is more of a continuation of the esophagus, and then we have the body of the stomach where most of the material is digested and sloshed around, and then the end of the stomach there where this material is ejected into the small intestine a little bit at a time. So I'm going to tell you about this, and then I'm going to show you the picture. So the first area, the cardia, is the upper part of the stomach. And this part is the part that's attached to the esophagus. Then we've got the fundus, And the fundus is this little projection right up here in the upper part of the stomach. Then we've got the body of the stomach, and this is the large area here toward the middle where most of the digestion, the food is sloughed back and forth. And the pyloric region. And the pyloric region is here at the end of the stomach before this food, or right now it's actually just this material. It's eventually it breaks into a liquid called chyme, and then this chyme is ejected into the small intestine. So take a look. It's a little gross, but this is an actual human stomach. This is a preserved section. So this is what's kind of hanging in your body, this little bag that's folded in your body. Now this has been cut in half and unfolded for you, flapped over. So this is our esophagus, and then this is the sphincter right here that prevents food from moving from the stomach back into the esophagus. Or I should say, should prevent food from moving from the stomach back into the esophagus. Unfortunately, sometimes food or acid from the stomach can move back up into the esophagus. Some of you maybe have experience with this. You might know what this is called because we feel it in our chest and because the acid in our stomach kind of burns our esophagus. It's called heartburn. Now, that sphincter right there should prevent that, but sometimes it happens with people. Sometimes people have not the tightest sphincter here, or they produce a lot of acid and it bubbles up, or sometimes if they lay down directly after they eat, they might have an issue with this. That little bubble right there is the fundus. And the fundus is a little bubble. This is really unique. I don't know if you guys can imagine what this is for, why there be this little parachute, this little bubble up here, but it's meant to collect gas particles. And what happens is this will get enough gas particles on it, a buildup of actual gases. Your diaphragm is resting right on your stomach, and as you breathe, your diaphragm is collapsing and relaxing from that dome to flat shape, and it will push on the fundus. And when it pushes on the fundus, it forces the bubbles up into here, and then you burp. So there's the anatomy of a burp. Now, here in the body of the stomach, we can see these folds right here. They're called rugae. And what these are is these are folds that are meant to help move our food around and grind it up in that maceration. So our stomach doesn't have teeth, not like our mouth, but it's got these little folds, kind of like if you've ever seen an old time washboard where people take their clothes and rub it up and down on the folds. Well, that's what these folds are doing is they're helping rub this material around and trying to break the material down even further. Then we get to the end of the area we call the pyloric region to the pyloric sphincter. And you can see how small that canal is right there. So what happens is the food doesn't just, well, not food at this material, but this mixture of chemicals and what used to be food doesn't just fall out of your stomach into your small intestine. It's literally squirted a little bit at a time, just like a squirt gun, into your small intestine as it's digested from your stomach. So just a little bit at a time squirts into this first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. That way we can really work on absorbing that food one little bit at a time. Histology of the stomach, just talk about what happens to the small microscopic areas here. The mucosa, which is the inlining of our whole entire digestive system, has what we call these gastric pits. And I'm going to show you a little version of this. So right here, it's just these microscopic indentations. And then there's these very specific cells. You can see the different colors of cells on here. And these cells have different jobs. So we've got chief cells, and they're also called zymogenic cells, but chief cells is the much more common term for these. And they're releasing this enzyme called pepsin. And pepsin is for digesting proteins, which is nice. The P and the P go together there. And then we also have what we call parietal cells. And parietal cells are secreting hydrochloric acid. Obviously, you probably at some point in time heard of stomach acid. Well, stomach acid is a pretty strong hydrochloric acid. It can be a pH almost as much as 3, which is like about the same pH as battery acid. This would actually burn our skin or our stomach. So what we also have are goblet cells. And these goblet cells secrete a mucus. Now, this isn't saliva, all right? It is not slime, it is mucus. And it is a really thick mucus. When I say mucus, you probably think of like the inside of your mouth, but it's way thicker than that. Imagine like peanut butter spread on toast, are like the thickest jam you've ever taken out of a jar and spread on a piece of toast. Like you could turn the toast upside down and it'll stick right to it. That's the kind of mucus that's secreted by these goblet cells in our stomach, prevent our stomach lining from being damaged by this hydrochloric acid. So this is just a blown up version. I'm not obviously there's I'm not going to ask you to memorize the pictures of these, but it's just showing you in these gastric pits each of these specialized cells secreting the material that can move up here. So they're down here protected by the mucus, so they're not damaged by that material that they actually secrete. And this is an actual microscope slide of human mucosa with the different folds in there. Now in the stomach, we talked about this before. We've got maceration, and maceration means that we're grinding this food around over those folds in our stomach. We're mixing this up with gastric juices, and it's converted into this liquid material called chyme. So what used to be a bolus of food, what used to be, the remnants of whatever we were eating for lunch or breakfast or whatnot, has now essentially been converted into mostly a liquid, almost entirely a liquid material that's squirted into our small intestine a little bit at a time. Now, chemical digestion in the stomach, it actually begins what we call the cephalic phase. And cephalic means our head, our cephalus. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but we start digestion before we even get food in our mouth. The sight, the smell, or even just the thought of food, the taste of it before it actually begins its journey through our alimentary tract. All of those are enough to trigger the release of acid from our stomach and other digestive enzymes from our small intestine and pancreas and liver. This gastric phase is kind of like a preparation phase for the food that we know is about to go through our digestive tract. And it's something that restaurants know. That's why the pictures that you see in the restaurants, the food always looks perfect, right? And some restaurants kind of have a very key characteristic smell, right? You can drive by In-N-Out Burger and you know where you're at without even looking around. And that is a phase that's there to basically prepare our digestive system for the food that we are about to get. Absorption in the stomach is really a small amount of absorption, maybe less than 10%. Just a few things come in directly through the wall of the stomach. Water is one of them. That's pretty important, right? We need water in our bodies. Weak glucose concentrations. That means that a little bit of sugar comes in, and electrolytes, salts. Now you think about it, things that are really important to our body. We need water, we need sugar, and we need a good salt balance so we don't get dehydrated. So it makes sense that those would come in directly to our bloodstream as soon as possible. Now there's also some other things like aspirin is taken directly in and alcohol. And unfortunately, alcohol is absorbed directly into our bloodstream without being filtered by our liver. Now you think about that. That's why alcohol has such an effect on us. And I hope you guys don't have any direct association with this yet, but eventually you may experience this. But when you drink an alcoholic drink, wine, beer, champagne, something to that effect, it goes into our bloodstream quickly without being filtered by our liver. And when our bloodstream is moving around, one of the places that receives a lot of blood is our brain. So now we bathe our blood in this, or we bathe our brain in this alcohol solution. It works its way through our liver after the fact. And our liver's job is to filter that alcohol out of our blood because it's a poison, it's a toxin, it's not something that belongs in our bloodstream. So that alcohol has a direct effect on our brain. All the other materials that we absorb out of our digestive system are routed through the liver before that blood reaches our body. So if there's any toxins or chemicals that our body shouldn't be exposed to, our liver's job is to filter those out before we get the blood that has those nutrients, except alcohol. So alcohol is directly absorbed into the bloodstream from the stomach. That's why it has such a profound and quick effect on us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the pancreas here, and then I'm going to jump ahead to the small intestine in just a second to break this up. So the pancreas is part of the next phase. It's an accessory organ. It's located behind the stomach, and it's connected directly to the small intestine. It's got two types of cells. A very small amount of the cells, the islets of Langerhans, These are there to secrete insulin. Now, a couple other hormones, but insulin is the most important one in this group. And you guys have probably heard of this. Some people have trouble with their pancreas secreting enough insulin. And if you don't secrete enough insulin from your pancreas, you may have something called diabetes. Insulin is the hormone that helps us regulate our blood sugar, that makes sure that our blood sugar levels stay at a healthy percentage. If we don't have enough insulin to produce, or we don't produce it at all, then yes, we say we have diabetes. Most of our cells in our pancreas are called Acini cells, and their job is to secrete pancreatic enzymes. The material the pancreas secretes is called pancreatic juice. Doesn't have a fantastic name. That's it. And the pancreas secretes this. It's really good at digesting a lot of different materials. So here's our pancreas right here. It just shows a section of the small intestine, and it's attached to this little tube right here, which also connects up here to the liver to secrete this material into the small intestine. The pancreatic juice, this material that's secreted by the pancreas, is an alkaline mixture of fluids and digestive enzymes. Now, the material that just came out of the stomach is very acidic. Now it meets this material in the small intestine that's very alkaline or basic. That's not an accident. When the acidic solution from the stomach meets the alkaline environment of the small intestine, we get a neutral environment. So the pancreatic enzymes, these pancreatic juice, it's okay at digesting carbohydrates. It's okay at digesting fats. It even breaks down some other materials here, but what it's really, really good at is protein digestion. In fact, the pancreas is so good at breaking down proteins, it can be dangerous. Back to this little picture right here. Sometimes this little duct right here can get clogged. If you've ever heard of someone having a gallstone, what can happen is you can get these bile salts that form an actual blockage of this passageway. And then the pancreatic juice builds up in the pancreas. Now, what's scary about that is that this pancreatic enzyme is strong enough to actually digest itself. So it can start digesting the pancreas and the intestinal organs around it, leading to internal bleeding and then the spread of infection from bacteria that's in your intestines. It's called pancreatitis. It's actually a very life-threatening condition and can be very serious. All right, I'm going to pause right here at the liver because I kind of already jumped ahead into the second section. I'm going to pause right here because the very first quiz is just on breakdown of materials from the mouth, from the esophagus, all the way to the stomach. And then the second quiz is more focused on what happens after that with the pancreas and the liver and the small and large intestine. So that's enough for video section number 1. We'll come back and start video section number 2. When you guys are studying materials here for the first quiz, I don't have any pictures on the quiz. It's all multiple choice questions. So I'm asking you about the different types of digestion that take place, mechanical and chemical. Okay. I ask you about what's happening in the esophagus, how we move food from the esophagus down to the stomach through peristalsis. And then in the stomach, I ask you about mechanical and chemical digestion, the different materials that are being digested in the stomach. So how is this happening? These different cells, chief cells secreting hydrochloric acid, secreting pepsin to break down proteins, and parietal cells secreting the hydrochloric acid. And the fact that our stomach is protected from this very acidic environment by these goblet cells secreting mucus. So check that out. Once again, that quiz is available to retake up to 3 times. So do the best you can, and good luck, you guys.